2 years ago in North Korea, Evelyn Salt, a CIA operative, endures brutal torture by the Korean army,
I'm really not who you think I am.
who believe she's a spy sent to sabotage their nuclear ambitions. Despite repeatedly insisting she isn't, they don't believe her and continue the torture. Eventually, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea pardons Salt for her supposed hostile act against their socialist nation. Ted Winter arrives to retrieve her in a prisoner exchange, Salt for a Korean national. Ted tells her that Mike, her boyfriend, pulled strings once he found out where she was. He petitioned the Senate and the State Department, and since the CIA didn't want the publicity, they were forced to act. In other words, Mike saved her life. In the present day in Washington, D.C., Salt and Mike celebrate their wedding anniversary and share a loving kiss.
Get your bugs off the table.
They're spiders.
At work, Salt tries to fold a napkin in preparation for their anniversary dinner, but ends up making a mess. Ted approaches and she tells him about the occasion. An operative brings in a file about a new target, but Ted tells him to hold off until the next day since it's Salt's anniversary. As they walk out, Sean, a CIA officer, runs up to them with urgent news. An FSB defector walked in 10 minutes ago but has refused to talk to anyone. Ted convinces Salt to conduct the interview, saying she's the best. They arrive at the secure briefing area where counterintelligence greets them, including Agent Peabody. All devices are locked away in a secure box. After the defector passes a neurological scan, Salt enters the room. The defector notes she's married and claims a husband is a liability, but Salt redirects the conversation. He introduces himself as Oleg Vasilyevich Orlov and says he has cancer. Orlov claims he has nothing to fear anymore because Russia is dying. Sean verifies that Orlov is a former FSB agent. Though the scan confirms his cancer, there's no record of him before 1993. Salt presses him to get to the point. Orlov begins speaking in Russian, but she insists on English since others are listening. He begins telling a story that dates back to the Cold War in 1975. A Soviet Olympic wrestler named Sasha Fyodorovich Chenkov met the world's only female chess grandmaster, Anja Nurikyova, in a gymnasium. They got married within a month and had a child within a year. The child later fell ill and was brought to a hospital, but passed shortly after. However, Orlov reveals that the Chenkov baby didn't pass on, but was taken by a spy master who had devised the ultimate plan to destroy America. It began with an American named Oswald, who emigrated to Russia and returned 3 years later. But the man who came back was actually a Russian spy named Alec. In 1963, Alec became the first success of the new infiltration program and a hero of the Soviet Union. With that success, the spy master was allowed to train more agents like Alec. At an abandoned monastery, children like Chenkov learned English before Russian and were subjected to intense psychological and physical conditioning to become iron-willed operatives. Chenkov was paired with a visiting American family, but after a tragic accident, Chenkov was sent alone to live undercover in the United States, waiting patiently to strike from within. Now, the long-anticipated Day X has arrived. Chenkov will travel to New York to assassinate the Russian president during the funeral of the American vice president. Orlov reveals that Chenkov is known as KA-12. Peabody notes that KA is a Cold War legend, sleeper agents placed in American society to sabotage and assassinate. Ted doesn't believe the story and urges Salt to end the interview. Salt asks what Orlov wants in return for the information, but he says he only wants to help her do what she must. As she prepares to leave, Orlov drops a final bombshell, revealing KA-12's name is Evelyn Salt. This gets everyone's attention, and when Salt tells Orlov that's her name, he identifies her as the Russian spy. An operative confirms through the scan that everything Orlov is saying is true. Stepping outside, Salt tells Ted she needs to call Mike, but Peabody stops her, insisting she runs a neuroscan. He finally agrees to her request, but goes with her to make the call. She reaches Mike's voicemail and urges him to call her immediately. Ted tries to keep her calm and suggests sorting everything out in his office, but Peabody insists they go to a secure location. Ted points out the second interrogation room as a secure space and asks Salt to wait there while he speaks to Peabody. He tries to persuade Peabody to give him a moment alone with her, saying she's scared, but Peabody refuses. Meanwhile, Orloff is being escorted into an elevator by two security agents. Suddenly, a retractable knife comes out from his shoe. He attacks the agents and escapes. Moments later, alarms begin blaring across the facility, but Orloff is nowhere to be found. His image is pulled from the database, and Ted instructs agents to circulate it. At the same time, Salt is spotted on the security feed. Her movements are tracked, and she's soon trapped on the second floor. She uses a fire extinguisher to cover the security cameras, prompting Peabody to order a tactical team to meet him at the south stairwell. Salt gathers supplies from a cabinet and covers a camera with her underwear before dismantling the table legs to make a weapon. Ted calls, telling her the TAC team will breach in 30 seconds and begs her to let him help, but she simply tells him to call her when he finds Mike. Just as the team is about to gas the room, Salt fires her makeshift weapon and causes an explosion. She quickly grabs a gun from one of the fallen men and escapes. Shooting out a window, she jumps through it as Ted orders agents to track her on the outside feeds. They spot her barefoot and running across the street. Peabody rejoins the group, and an agent mentions that Mike left his office an hour ago. Ted suggests checking Salt's apartment, and they head out. Salt manages to hail a cab and tries calling Mike again, but reaches voicemail. Frustrated, she removes her SIM card and breaks it. Upon arriving at home, she calls for Mike but gets no response.
Mike? Honey?
Their dog runs to her, then leads her to Mike's overturned chair, making her realize he's been taken. As the CIA arrives, Salt grabs a gun and a hidden backpack, then heads to Mike's home office with the dog. She carefully places the spider inside a container, just as the front door is blown open. Tossing a grenade, the agents begin searching for her. Peabody notices the broken office window and checks, but Salt is hidden between the wall and AC unit. He doesn't see her. She begins carefully moving between windows until she enters her neighbor's apartment. Ted tells Peabody that Orloff could be lying, but Peabody is skeptical, pointing out that Salt ran. Ted tries to vouch for Salt, citing her service to the country, but Peabody remains unmoved. The neighbor's daughter opens the window, and Salt climbs in, asking her to watch the dog. While changing clothes, she reflects on the first time she met Mike, and how he stole her heart.
I'm an arachnologist.
Disguised in a jacket and beanie, Salt walks down the street, but Ted spots her. He starts running, signaling the others, and she takes off. Operatives close in, and she hides behind a car. Peabody, gun drawn, orders her to surrender. Salt insists she's innocent,
I have to find my husband!
and that she's been set up and must find Mike. Peabody warns he'll shoot, but Salt suddenly sees a truck moving under the bridge. Out of survival instinct, Salt rolls off the ledge and lands on a passing truck just as Peabody fires his gun. Luckily, the shot misses, but Peabody immediately radios her location and orders a roadblock. The agents hit the road in hot pursuit. Salt spots the police cars blocking the truck's path and quickly jumps onto a nearby tanker. Peabody and Ted notice her move, and as she nears an overhead structure, Peabody opens fire again. Salt sprints and leaps to another truck, nearly slipping, but manages to catch herself with one hand. Back in the car, Peabody is now convinced Salt is a mole, though Ted still doubts. Peabody argues she's a trained liar and that everything she said has been to protect her cover. Salt regains balance on the truck, but the driver sees her and suddenly slams the brakes, causing her to slide off. Now on the ground, she starts running again, with Peabody's car navigating through traffic to pursue her. A power bike rides past, and Salt knocks the rider off, taking his bike. Peabody attempts to shoot at her shoulder to disarm her, but they lose sight of her as she weaves through the traffic. She eventually escapes when their car gets stuck among other vehicles with no space to maneuver. Peabody tells Ted they need to lock down New York. Left with no choice, Ted orders that the Secret Service be alerted and that they be warned Salt may be targeting the Russian president. Peabody pulls up Salt's file and reveals that she spent part of her childhood in Russia. In 1988, she was in a car accident with her parents, who both passed. Ted explains that her parents were teachers in the U.S. Embassy, working with children of the American staff. Peabody says they need a plane to New York that night, leaving Ted in deep thought. Meanwhile, in a bar restroom, Salt kicks down a maintenance box and uses a sanitary pad to stop the bleeding from her wound. She flashes back to tender moments with Mike, but is interrupted by a group of girls entering. Adjusting her beanie, she quietly steals the jacket one of them leaves near the door and exits. On a bus, the radio announces the funeral of the vice president and the attendance of the Russian president. Salt zones out and recalls the moment Mike rescued her from North Korea. She tells him he shouldn't have come, afraid for his safety now that they know who he is. Mike asks who she really is, telling her he's ready to accept anything. Tearfully, Salt confesses that she works for the CIA.
I work for the CIA.
She believes there's no future between them because he'll never be safe with her. But Mike doesn't care about safety. He knows her, and that's all that matters.
I want to spend the rest of my life with you.
Arriving in New York, Salt books a deluxe hotel room. On her way up, she discreetly steals clothing from a rack, unnoticed by a worker. Once inside, she checks the room, removes her fake teeth, and takes out her contact lenses. Someone seems to be getting more suspicious by the minute. She lays out cash, weapons, and ammo on the bed, then injects the spider and draws out its venom. After printing out access maps of the subway tunnels, she gazes out at St. Bartholomew's Church and recalls the day she took her CIA oath alongside fellow agents.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Then she begins dyeing her hair black. The next morning, the day of the vice president's funeral, a public parade is held in his honor. The Russian president arrives amidst heavy security. In the crowd, Salt stalks, her gaze fixed on him. At his post, Ted asks an operative about the security setup. He's told it's tight, with Secret Service agents fully deployed. On a subway train, Salt discreetly drops a sheet of paper that emits smoke, creating a distraction. Using the advantage, she heads to the back of the train and jumps out, gaining entrance into the tunnels with her map. Inside the church, the service begins, and Ted and Peabody take their positions, watching from the balcony. As the U.S. president gives his speech, Salt gains access to the crypt of the building, taking down several security agents along the way. The Russian president begins his speech while Salt runs upstairs. Security soon notices a comms unit is unresponsive, and Peabody immediately goes to investigate. Using a mirror, Salt sees Peabody approaching with his gun drawn and quickly attacks. She kicks away his gun, and they begin fighting. When she spots another guard approaching, she picks up the gun and shoots at him. As Peabody tries to stop her, she kicks him down and moves forward. Peabody gives chase, but Salt is already in position. She fires at two strategic spots in the building, creating panic inside the church. Then, she sets up a device and triggers an explosion, throwing the place into chaos as people scramble for safety. Suddenly, the podium collapses and the Russian president falls into a hole, where Salt is waiting. Though security rushes to respond, it's too late. Salt draws her weapon and shoots the president. Moments later, Peabody arrives to find the Russian president down. He orders Salt to drop her weapon and arrests her. As medics are called, Peabody checks the president for a pulse but finds none. Outside, unrest grows as Salt is escorted out by security. Ted angrily confronts her, yelling, but is held back by officers. Salt is put in a car and the police drive off in a convoy. Ted tells Peabody that the president passed en route to the hospital and admits Peabody was right about Salt all along. Still, Peabody notes that Salt had a chance to kill him earlier, but didn't. Things may not be as they seem. During the ride, Salt recalls a childhood memory with Schneider and other kids. Schneider calls her Natasha, but she insists her name is Evelyn Salt.
My name is Evelyn Salt.
Inside the car, she suddenly attacks the officers using a taser. She kicks out the two in the back. tases the driver and uses his head to steer the wheel while forcing him to accelerate. They ram the police cars coming her way, causing a pileup. Then she crashes the car off an overpass into a taxi. Though disoriented, Salt grabs the keys, uncuffs herself, and escapes as civilians rush in to help the officer. She steals a cap and disappears. Now on a boat, she reflects on the past about her mission. Orloff reminds her there are others like her and leaves her in the care of Martin Crenshaw from the U.S. Embassy. As they sail off, news breaks of the chaos. Riots have begun outside the U.S. Embassy, with similar anti-American protests erupting across Russia. The new Russian president condemns the assassination, vowing revenge. As the body is flown back to Moscow, U.S. diplomatic cars are bombed, and the Russian armed forces go on high alert. President Lewis calls an emergency meeting at the White House. Salt meets with Orloff, who warmly calls her Chenkov. He says she wasn't supposed to marry unless it served a tactical purpose, but Salt admits she did it to appear normal. He expresses pride in her and calls her his greatest creation. Upon arriving at a warehouse, Salt notices armed men as she and Orloff are escorted inside. She asks about Mike, and Orloff admits he has him, claiming he needed to be certain of her loyalty. Salt inquires about the next phase of the plan, and Orloff reveals their goal is to seize control of the atomic weapons. When she asks how, he remains vague. Eventually, they stop before a pit where Mike is below, chained and gagged. Though visibly affected, Salt masks her emotions while Orloff watches her closely. He asks if she's ready to see Mike eliminated, and when she asks for a gun to do it herself, he refuses, saying that would be too easy. He signals to his men, who begin flooding the pit with water. As it rises, Mike looks up at Salt in terror. Powerless to intervene, she watches as he drowns before her. Tears fill her eyes, but she fights to contain them. A gun is briefly aimed at her, but Orlov, satisfied with her reaction, orders it lowered. The men cheer in Russian, celebrating the return of their sister, and Salt recognizes many of them from her childhood. Orlov then takes her to a room and shows her a map, explaining where she will meet another agent for the next step. As he talks, Salt pours them drinks, then suddenly smashes the bottle over his head and stabs him repeatedly in the neck with the broken edge, ending him. She arms herself, steps outside with grenades, and throws them, blowing up the place. She opens fire and eliminates the rest of the men. Afterward, she looks down into the pit where Mike drowned, flashing back to their wedding day. Grief-stricken but composed, she moves on. Following Orlov's directions, she heads to an aircraft and reunites with Schneider. She recognizes him and touches his face gently. He tells her he has spent the last 3 years as NATO's liaison to the White House under the name Colonel Edward Thomas. He gives her a new ID and shows her a manuscript detailing their mission to infiltrate the bunker beneath the White House. When she asks what her role is, he tells her she will be the one to eliminate the president. That night, they arrive at the White House. After their IDs are verified, they're let in.
All clear.
Schneider and Salt, heavily disguised as a male naval officer, are thoroughly checked and cleared. Meanwhile, inside the White House, Ted informs the officials that Salt may be a Soviet plant inserted years ago in preparation for something the KGB called Day X, a day marking the start of a large strike against the US and her allies. The president arrives, and Schneider quietly tells Salt he trusts her to do her job. Curious about his own assignment, she asks, but he simply replies he's going home. As soon as he sees the president, Schneider shoves Salt to the floor, steals a gun from a security officer, and opens fire. He's quickly shot multiple times, but not before triggering a bomb. The president is rushed back into the elevator and secured. Salt recovers, steals a keycard, and races up the stairs, then removes her disguise. Meanwhile, Ted tells the team he thinks he saw Salt disguised as the naval officer. This triggers a full security alert. As the elevator doors open, agents shield the president and move him toward the bunker. One of the agents radios in the ID of Salt's disguise. At the same time, Salt runs toward the location. As the president waits for the hallway to clear, he declares that if Russia authorized the attack, it would be considered an act of war and will be met with retaliation. Once the path is cleared, the team rushes to a second elevator and successfully enters. But just as the doors close, Salt attacks a guard outside, seizes his weapon, and forces the elevator open. Seeing the car descend, Salt climbs down, jumping from ledge to ledge. The elevator reaches the lower level, and one security officer steps out to check for threats before giving the all clear. The group enters the bunker, leaving one guard behind to secure the door. Just before it closes, Salt drops down from above, knocks out the guard, and takes out another, gaining entry with her gun raised. Inside the safe room, Ted informs the president that it looks like Day X has begun, leaving the president momentarily speechless. On a live screen, the CIA director reports that Russian missiles have been deployed to the field and confirmed underground.
Confirmed on the ground.
The president suggests they consider their nuclear options, prompting an operative to unlock a secured case. Just then, Salt shoots at the control panel. An operative monitoring the system quietly reports that the outer port door is jammed and that most security camera feeds are down. They move quickly to seal the room and assign guards to check. Salt encounters two operatives and engages in a brutal fight, eventually knocking them out and continuing on. The general is contacted, and after the authentication codes are activated,
5, 6, Tango.
the nuclear case opens up for the president. The units are called for their status, but there is no response. Just then, Salt is spotted outside the door beside a fallen guard, and everyone is at alert. Ted asks a Secret Service agent for a gun, citing his qualifications, but the agent refuses, saying only the Secret Service can be armed inside the president's bunker. What comes next shocks everyone as Ted suddenly pulls a gun from the man, shooting him down. He then turns the weapon on the others, taking out everyone in the room except the president. He reveals his true identity as Nikolai Tarkovsky, forcing the president to sit and cooperate, threatening to end him otherwise. When asked about the selective strike options, the president rebukes him, prompting Ted to shoot him. Salt peeps in from outside, seeing only Ted alive. He begins activating the strike sequence. She calls out to him, and in Russian, he congratulates her for making it. She questions why he never told her who he truly was, and he admits he tried, but loneliness was his only friend. Salt notes he wasn't part of their group in Russia, and Ted explains he was a class ahead. Now he claims it's his honor to launch the next phase, targeted strikes on Tehran and Mecca. The plan is to eliminate 9 million people, enrage 1 billion Muslims, and cause America's downfall. As the launch sequence is activated, Salt thinks fast and asks to join him in the control room. Just as he agrees, a news report interrupts, revealing the Russian president is alive. Apparently, he was only temporarily paralyzed by a toxin derived from spider venom. Now onto Salt, Ted admits that he had a feeling they lost her back in North Korea. He confesses to being the one who ordered Orlov to abduct Mike, and Salt reveals Orlov is already gone. Ted sees this as an advantage, since Orlov wanted Salt to come out alive. But Ted wants Salt to take the fall, while he becomes the hero.
And I'm the hero.
Enraged, Salt fires at him, but the bulletproof glass holds. Spotting the code by the door, she leaves. Ted drags the president's body to the case and uses his hand to complete the verification process. Meanwhile, Salt dents a panel near the door and manages to override the lock. She bursts in, exchanging gunfire with Ted. When their clips run dry, they engage in hand-to-hand combat. Ted gains the upper hand and attempts to launch the missile, but Salt stops him and stabs his shoulder. Other agents break in, and she successfully stops the launch, aborting the process just as she's shot in the back. Salt is arrested, while Ted is identified. Outside, Peabody learns that Orlov and his men were eliminated by an unknown assailant, making him reconsider everything he knows. As Salt is escorted past Ted, who's being treated by medics, he subtly reaches for a small knife. But Salt has her own plans. Using her cuff chains, she attacks him, jumps over the railing and secures the chain around his neck with all her strength before she is brought down, but it's already too late for Ted. Peabody is alerted and Salt is taken to a helicopter. Once aboard, he's told he has 15 minutes alone with her before she's handed to the FBI. He asks why she eliminated Ted, but when she gives a vague answer, he punches her. Salt then tells him the truth about everything she's done so far, and Ted's involvement. There are no more like her, but many more like Ted and Orlov. A message confirms her fingerprints at Orlov's murder scene, and Peabody tells her no one would believe her even if he eventually believes.
Nobody else would.
She suggests he makes another way, hinting at the cuffs in her hand. With tears in her eyes, she promises to destroy everyone responsible for taking everything from her. After a moment of deep thought, Peabody yells and punches her, but it's just a cover to unlock her cuffs. As they near the water, he tells her to go get them. She slams into the door and jumps into the ocean. Peabody yells at the pilot to circle back, playing along with the escape. Salt swims to shore and runs into the woods, successfully escaping. News reports confirm the demise of Natasha Chenkov, also known as Evelyn Salt, and the destruction of the terrorist group. On a peacekeeping visit to Moscow, newly sworn-in President Stevens announces the news as he lays flowers at the site of the 1974 plane crash that claimed his parents and sister while touring Russia.
Tour of Russia.